I'm Professor Charlene Villaseñor-Black, and I'm the acting director this fall while Chonaria is on a much needed leave. I'm a professor in the Department of Art History and in Chicano Studies, and just here to welcome you to this event, our conversation with Grace Montañez Davis. Proper introductions will follow in just a moment. The order today, we're going to start with a Q&A, an interview with Anna NietoGómez leading that, and then there'll be Q&A from the audience, and then there's a reception, and the reception is in our conference room in the center. So that's our order for today. And I also wanted to point people to the glass cases outside of the center where we have on display some of the papers from the Grace Montañez Davis collection that are archived here at the center. So there's some real interesting things there from the 1940s. This is our last big event of the fall. We've had the migration conference, the education summit, the La Guerra conference. It's been a busy fall, but it's the first event funded by this big NEH and American Library Association grant, Latino Americans 500 Years of History. So there will be more events in the winter and spring funded by this grant. I'd like to present to you now Dr. Virginia Espino, who's a member of the Faculty Advisory Committee of the Chicano Studies Research Center, and here at the UCLA Library, the Center for Oral History Research, and has worked quite a bit with the center. So I'm going to give her the honor of making the proper introductions today. Thank you so much.
Welcome everyone, it's so great to be here, and thank you so much to the Chicano Studies Research Center for hosting this wonderful conversation between civil rights pioneer, what I call a civil rights pioneer, former Deputy Mayor Grace Montañez Davis, and Chicana feminist activist, Anna NietoGómez. So I am Virginia Espino, just to give you a brief introduction of myself, and I work at the Oral History Center conducting oral histories in the Chicano and Latino community, Chicana Latina community, and I've been fortunate enough to have conversations with both Grace Montañez Davis and Anna NietoGómez, and luckily we have Ms. Davis's interviews online. You can access that through our website at the UCLA Center for Oral History, and shortly, I would say in the next few months, maybe 6 months, we'll have Anna NietoGómez's oral history online. It takes a while to have it transcribed and have it returned back to the person who's been interviewed. They give it back to us, and then we mount those interviews online. So I just wanted to make that brief introduction of myself, and hopefully you'll go to our website and look for some of our oral histories. Excuse me. I'm going to introduce Grace Montañez Davis first. And I'd just like to say that she was born in 1926, for those of you to kind of situate yourself and imagine what Los Angeles was like in 1926. It's a Los Angeles that you probably wouldn't recognize today. She attended public schools in Lincoln Heights. Anybody here know where Lincoln Heights is? That's where Grace is from. She grew up with some economic advantages and was able to attend a private Catholic school called Sacred Heart in Lincoln Heights. And she was one of the few, is there someone who's an alum of Sacred Heart? Oh, you know? Oh, that's wonderful. She entered Sacred Heart School in Lincoln Heights as one of the few Mexican American students at the time. She would go on to attend Immaculate Heart College and UCLA. So she's a Bruin, so it's really wonderful to have her here as a Bruin. Breaking barriers for Mexican American women has always been her calling and her strength. As an adult, she became involved in the community service organization, working on voter registration in the Spanish-speaking community. So community service organization was an organization founded in about 1949, and later on I'm going to pass a timeline with historical events that kind of help you situate yourself with this time period that we're going to be looking at. From that point on, she focused her energies on empowering the Mexican American community through political activism, working on the historic Edward Roybal and Julian Nava campaigns. This work did not go unnoticed, and it led to key appointments for Mrs. Davis. She was appointed field representative by Congressman George E. Brown in 1965, and then deputy mayor for Mayor Tom Bradley in 1973. Both posts point to historic gains for Mexican American women in California. So we're really lucky to have her here today. And now I want to introduce Anna NietoGómez. And Anna NietoGómez was born, interestingly enough, 20 years later in 1946. So the community that she grew up in was very different because she grew up in San Bernardino. But their lives merged in Los Angeles during a really important period of civil rights struggle in LA. She grew up in a segregated community, but managed to make a name for herself in her school and her community through her charm and her intellect, and you'll see why later on. Education was an important value to her and to her family, and her parents encouraged her to pursue a post-secondary degree. And if you know a little bit about history, you know how hard it is, or how hard it was, for Chicanas, Mexican American women, to be allowed to attend a four-year university away from home. So her family is really the exception as far as supporting her to do that. Even today, I hear people talk about not allowing their children to live in the dorms when they're immigrant parents, because there's a lot of distrust and a lack of understanding of what that experience could be like. And for good reason, because it's just something that they haven't experienced, it's not something that they know about. And it takes generations to break down those barriers. And later on, Anya would be the one who would actually talk to parents about allowing their children to attend four-year universities. She would become a counselor. On a near fluke, she begins California State University, Long Beach in 1967, and promised not to return home without a degree in hand. At Cal State Long Beach, she is immersed in the intellectual life she longed for, as well as the emerging civil rights movement. Early on, Ms. NietoGómez becomes involved with UMAS, the United Mexican American Students Organization, and experiences a cultural and gender awakening unlike anything prior. She labors diligently for student access, retention, and rights, but discovers through her interaction with male members that in UMAS that women's unique issues were only going to be addressed in a woman-centered organization. She founds Hijas de Cuauhtémoc in 1971, which is a female-centered, woman-centered organization dealing specifically with gender issues. And she continues her activism around race and class, but with a unique feminist perspective. In 1973, she creates the widely used feminist journal Encuentro Femenil that forever changes the intellectual landscape of the Chicana and Chicana movement. So here I want to introduce you to both Anna NietoGómez and Ms. Grace Montañez Davis. Thank you. So this is going to be an informal conversation that we're going to get to witness. It's almost like sitting in their living room when they're going to be talking about reminiscing and talking about those important times.
Okay. Well, thank you to our living room. Welcome to our living room. Grace, it's a pleasure to be with you today. And just to share, I met Grace in about 1973 probably, at the Comisión Femenil Convention in Santa Barbara.
No, I met you when you brought your baby.
Yeah,
Was
there.
that the opening?
Yeah, that
Okay.
was there. I brought my boy. We didn't have childcare. That was another issue I'm talking about. But I brought my little baby. He's not little anymore. He's 43 years old. And Grace was very supportive and encouraging of everybody, men and women. And even though I wrote, I really didn't consider myself a writer. But what I remember the most is Grace, she told me, Anna, you're our poet laureate. You write, and that stayed with me, because that's the first time I was recognized as a writer. So I thank you very much for that. Okay, let's start with you being a trailblazer. You were a trailblazer in your personal as well as in your political life. Let's start with your educational endeavors, because even there, as a student, you chose a different path. What did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, let me start when I was born, which was 88 years ago. We'll be 89 next week. And we were supposed to be poor, but I don't remember that we were. We always had food on the table. I was born right directly in front of the elementary school, Albion Street School. And I went to school there I lived through the 1930-some earthquake. I lived through a time when it rained, I guess, after the earthquake, and we had to go to school in tents. And so, you know, school was, I like school, you know, so. At that time, they had middle school, or they used to call it junior high school. And my mother could not see me going through the heavy part of town way over to Figueroa Street. And so they decided I should go to Catholic school. Well, that was just 8 blocks. My mother could stand and see me go down the street. Now, it just so happens, I guess, that the Catholic schools were very amenable to providing, you know, the educational opportunities, because they always provided me the opportunity to work. I either worked in the library, in the no, they didn't have a cafeteria, but later in college I worked in the lab as an assistant to the teacher, made solutions and whatever had to be done. So I was fortunate that they provided the opportunity for me. In high school, I was offered a scholarship in sociology, but I said no, because in my general science class that I had in high school, I became in love with science, a microscope, to be able to see a petal, a flower, and see the beautiful cells and the colors and everything. So I was determined to work with the microscope.
So you decided to be a scientist?
Well, yes, that's why I turned down the sociology, because I said, no, I want to see what science is all about. I just had a general knowledge about that and so on. In my time also, it's just because I was going to school, the neighborhood made me their nurse, their interpreter, whatever they needed, they would come to me. Sometimes I would just say, put a clean towel on it and take them to emergency, you know. But anyway, my mother always worked for the community. Anytime there was a disaster in Mexico, she would collect clothing and what have you, and our home was a depot. We collected everything, and she would clean out our closets. Many times I had to rescue my pair of shoes that I wore to go to church or graduation or something. But she was very active in church. She worked, I guess, making, as we all did all our lives, women, at least in those days, women did all the cooking, all the cleaning, whether it was for church or home or the neighbor. So I was involved. If she cooked, I served, and so on. So I learned to be aware of the needs of our people. So I responded as she responded. And I've continued to do that throughout my life and so on. One thing I've been telling students that I know, that they don't ask for help. I don't know why, maybe some independent women who struggle and so on have learned to ask for help. But even today, I find young women just suffering with no ability to master skills and so on, because they don't ask for help. And I tell young women especially to ask for help, and don't be afraid to enter an area that women have not been in there before, because you may be the person that can succeed in that area. At least I found that. And also I found that, like in the campaigns and so on, I would participate, help. But not only would I do what was assigned to me, but I would volunteer to help others, especially if they were doing a different job. You not only learn the skills that other person or other people, but people are watching what you're doing. And they notice that you do this, that you help, that you share, that you are concerned. And I know when I worked for Roybal, it was at George Brown headquarters, and I managed the headquarters and did just that. When Lucille Roybal came, I offered to help her because she was doing something different, and I wanted to know what it was. George Brown took note of that, and when I got through with the Roybal campaign, he hired me to take care of all the requests that people needed for help with any of the federal agencies like Social Security, Immigration, Health, Veterans, any of those. And that in itself exposed me to the many things that our people need and the many things that are out there. And to this day, I've always used those resources and so on.
Let's talk a little bit about your courage and fortitude and perseverance to work towards achieving your goals in a world that's different than it is now. In a world where racism, discrimination against you because of your national origin, your race, and also because of your gender, was considered normal, and especially in the workplace. And employers felt that it was not their problem. Discrimination was okay. It was up to you to handle it and make it work for you. Can you tell us what your experiences were when you worked at Immaculate College at the Goodyear Tire Company?
Well, for some reason, I do and I don't, but I speak up. Maybe I'll do it as a question and not as a statement to try to get them to answer. At Immaculate Heart, one summer, I guess employers would come to the college and ask if they needed some summer help. And I got a job at the Goodyear company answering the phone. And I remember the employer, when he called me to interview me, thought I had a wonderful voice and would be great on the telephone. So he hired me to answer the phone and take orders of people who needed tires or whatever. And I was working for him until all of a sudden, after a couple of weeks, one of the other students from Immaculate Heart showed up for work. And I told her, I don't know that there is an opening here. So, she left. And the next day, the employer came back and told me that he could not afford to have a colored person working for him because one of his clients told him that he could not do business with him because he hired a person of color. And so he came and told me that he was sorry that he would have to let me go. So I was, really puzzled, and I went back to the college and told them, and they said, well, he has a client who won't work with him if he has a color, and so, that's the way it is. And when talking about this to Anna, it occurred to me, there was one colored woman in my class, but we never talked about that. She wore her hair in some kind of curls, so she really, her hair, wasn't kinky or anything like that. So, that was one occasion for me when, and I really didn't know what was happening.
Can you share your experience when you were a graduate student at UCLA in the biochemistry lab?
That's the one I couldn't remember. When I applied, when I graduated from Immaculate Heart, I had 2 majors, chemistry and bacteriology. And I didn't realize I was just taking the classes that I liked and that my friends were taking. And their science department was led by a young nun from Stanford. And I was a chemistry major, but I was also attending these other classes. So when I went to UCLA, they didn't know where to put me, with the 2 majors. So he told me as he was interviewing me that he had never had a Mexican in his department. It was a biochemistry department. And that if I had any problems as a Mexican or as a woman, that I would have to take care of them myself because he didn't want to know about it. So, I said, oh, sure, okay, I can handle my problems. Well, as it turned out, there were 25 Jews and me. So if there was any problems, I thought that they were going to come from the Jews, not from me. At the time, there were only 5 Latino graduate students. They were all from South America. They were the wealthy Latinos in South America who could afford to come and live here. There were no Mexicans from East LA or anywhere. When the GI Bill came in, is when you started to see undergraduates come and so on. And I got along famously with them. I used to carpool with about 5 Hispanics in one car. they used to pick me up for football games at the end of the week. So, the Chicanos were just great. They always have it. They have always walked with me as I have all these experiences. So, by the way, the Dr. Max Dunn, who was the director of biochemistry, when I was nominated to be deputy mayor, he sent me a note and said that I had found my station in life. That I guess I was probably more a technician, although I did, research and all that, but still, and I ended up with 3 publications under him. Now, the same doctor, the first publication, I had just married, but he put Grace Montañez Davis, the first one I was married, Grace Montañez. I wanted to make sure that the Montañez was on. Then later he put Grace Montañez Davis. And I don't know, he kept doing things like that. There was never any real, during the work or anything, any discrimination or anything else. He converted, I guess.
And this was at the USC medical school.
That was at UCLA.
UCLA.
When the first job that I had when I graduated was at USC, the medical school. And the director was very unhappy because they did not call him for references. I guess he thought, well, this was not acknowledging UCLA or something. But I don't remember ever having any other experience.
Okay. Let's move on to your experience with the Democratic Party and electing Mexican Americans to office. Let's kind of create the scene. Mexican Americans were not elected to office. The last one was in the 1800s for the state of California. And there were various organizations. The Mexican Americans in the Democratic Party established the Latin American division, and their goal was to elect Mexican Americans. And they recruited Edward Roybal and encouraged him to run for city council of the 9th district the first time, and he didn't win the first time, but was successful the second time. But he saw the need to, that the Democratic wasn't really all that. They only went to them when they needed them, but they weren't involved in helping them to achieve their own goals. So they decided to organize their own political organization. It was so they renamed the Edward Roybal Election Committee to the committee, the Chicano or the Mexican American Political Election Committee, something like that. I have it here, but I can't. Oh, Community Political Organization, that's what it was called. But then they met Sal Alinsky and Fred Ross and convinced them that they could achieve more by being a nonpartisan organization. So they organized the Community Service Organization in 1947. So they achieved many things. One of the things they achieved is a citizenship program, and Grace benefits from this program directly through her family. So Grace, why don't you tell us how you benefited, or how you first came across the CSO program?
Well, I think my first, I don't remember if we maybe attended one or two
Grace.
Democratic meetings or something. Oh, I forgot. But we started a Democratic committee in Lincoln Heights, and Henrietta Villascusa, who was the first Hispanic public health nurse, certainly in the city. I don't know, probably more, other places. So anyway, she was the president of that committee. We had our own meetings, but I remember we used to go to Monterey Park Democratic meeting, and that's where we met George Brown, who was running for their city council and stuff, I don't remember exactly how, but I used to attend meetings sometimes in the valley, San Fernando Valley. That, by the way, is where I met Howard Berman, who's the guy that was at city council and that was the Grace, I can't think of his name. Anyway, most of the people that are in office in the valley, I met there. I mean, for many of them, at least 5 or 6. From that, we got involved with the CSO. Now,
Didn't your mother?
yes, my mother. Well, they had a class in the plaza. What was over in the Boyle Heights, and I remember my mother used to take a bus and go over there at night and whatever. And she was studying with Alvina Carrillo for citizenship. And when she graduated, my husband and I went to the graduation. Well, Roybal was there. He was the speaker. And I was so impressed, and so was my husband, with the citizenship classes and the things they said they were doing and all that kind of stuff, that we lived in the west side near UCLA here. And we decided we should have a class here. And I know we asked some people that were leaders and so on, and they got us in touch with the Sisters of Social Service. They had a little storefront that they used for their activities. Well, they loaned us the building for our classes. And I know that one of the persons we recruited who later became a CSO person, he was a Hispanic, and he, I think, had something to do with one of the Protestant seminaries on the west side. And when my husband and I moved back to Lincoln Heights, we recruited him as a teacher for our classes, so they continued having those. When we moved to Lincoln Heights, we again, decided to have classes there. And, looking around the community, we contacted the Lincoln Heights Library, and they let us use the basement. It was a good size, about this size. And when I taught Spanish and my husband taught English, and my first class, my father came to it, and he was one of my students. And one of my brightest, I must say. Not just because he's my father, but he did. My father always read L'Opinion and the LA Times. I have been remembering, I was thinking the other day, how much it now costs. And so,
the first CSO organization started in Boyle Heights, but you and Henrietta, Marianne Graff, and others established the second CSO chapter in Lincoln Heights, and Henrietta was...
Oh, not really. I don't remember a CSO.
Yeah.
I remember the Democratic Club.
You started CSO, there were two organizations.
We were all involved in the same thing, so, you know, it's kind of hard to keep them straight.
Okay, well, let's move on to you becoming a campaign manager for Edward Roybal.
Oh, that was one of the most interesting and gratifying experiences in my life. When Roybal, when they convinced him, of course, we knew all was going on through the CSO. And my husband, who was a school teacher at Lincoln Heights, became his public relations person. He's a writer, or he was a writer and so on. So he volunteered to Roybal, which, you know, would have been a very expensive person to hire and so on. So it was really very gratifying that he was able to do that. So he did all the publicity for him and all the news releases and things like that. His office, campaign office, was on Vermont. Like we're on 2nd or 3rd Street, I guess it was. We had problems because Roybal was catering to the Jewish West Side communities. So we would get to Lucille and say, tonight, when you pillow talk, you tell him that he has to devote more time to East Side. And it worked, whatever she said. The thing that was electrifying, really, I can't think of another word, the whole community from the very beginning got involved. I mean, there were so many polls for, you know, casting votes. There were so many people coming forth and participating, not only in the fundraising, but, you know, other rallies and things that we had. So, and of course, I'm saying this as looking back on all this, because at that time, of course, we were just busy campaigning and what have you. So many people were involved and so on that when the election took place, we, for some reason, were really looking at this. We recruited people to work in the voting polls so that we were right there to see what was going on.
What happened when Roybal ran for supervisor?
Well, that's the thing I'm talking about.
I know, but when he didn't win, what did you do?
Oh, well, that's what we became aware of, because we were there, which I've never seen the community this way. As I said, they were at the polls, there were rallies everywhere. Anyway, so the night of the election, after they picked the polls closed and they picked up the ballots and so on, and they took them to a place there on Alameda Street. It used to be a macaroni factory, and that's the place the county used to collect and count. Remember, they did this by hand. Well, we were right there when they were counting them. We knew that we had the right to do that. So we, all of a sudden, the ballot boxes were gone. Not all of them, but some of them in the back were taken away. And we noticed that, there was a lot of whispering, a lot of talking among themselves and so on. So we, of course, were reading the headlines in the Times that said, that he's winning, that he's ahead, and all kinds of things. So, we were elated. But then later, all of a sudden, he was losing. And so we said, something was very wrong. And it was interesting. Henrietta and Marion Graff, who were two prominent members of CSO, and I know myself, my compadres, and a few other CSO people, got together that weekend to talk about what had happened. And we all decided that something was very wrong. And we scheduled a meeting the next day in Carpenter's Hall, which is on Soto near First Street. Well, when we got there, the place was packed, standing room only. Now, we didn't know what advertising or, in the paper or something, but they were there. Everybody was there. The people who had worked the polls, especially, and they all started to reveal, well, the ballot box disappeared here too. Or the worst thing, as the people approached the polls, they were stopped at a distance from the polls. And they were asked to read the Constitution. I mean, I don't remember reading beyond 10 or something like that. Just reading other documents, but the legal documents, things that you and I probably are concerned about. And here are these people who, were just learning English and stuff, were asked to do all these things. So we decided to go to the ACLU and ask them what to do in order to document all these irregularities. And the people immediately came, no, that's all right, I don't need it. They volunteered to go among the people all around the neighborhoods of the polls and ask them, what had happened to them. Anybody who had any experience, they were interviewing them and documenting them. The ACLU developed a form, very simple form, in order to write up these. There were 92 irregularities, 92. And so then we decided we have to bring it to the authorities. And we couldn't go to the supervisors, of course, because they had done the assaults and what have you. So we went to the state, what is it, the state fair election practice. And they just said, you know, we'll look into it. And that was it. The Civil Rights Commission in California was headed or chaired by the president of UCLA, Dr. Sprock. And they were meeting in Los Angeles at the Hilton. And I remember that Michael Mother went with me because I had to have a witness to everything. And she was there with me, and when I entered the room, the hearing room, the president started asking me questions about myself and wanted to know where I went to school. And when I told him, you know, UCLA, he was delighted and, you know, made a big fuss about it and all that. Well, they listened to all that I had to say about what had happened. And again, you know, they will look into it. So, I don't really remember what other group we approached, but we really went to a lot of them, as many as we could.
Yeah.
And interesting, when I came out of the room, all the newsmen were waiting for me. And they told me, we took bets as to what you studied at UCLA. You know, because you're a woman and all that stuff. So I said, well, what did you bet? Well, you know, school teacher, nurse, I don't know, just the things that we used to do in those days. And I said, sorry, you didn't win. And when I told them that I have a degree in microbiology, you know, they probably didn't even know what it was. And so that, you know, that was interesting. But we were never able to do anything about getting that looked into and corrected and so on. But years later, MALDEF was suing this county about discrimination in voting rights. And of course the county said, we don't discriminate. And fortunately, whoever the lawyers were, they happened to talk to somebody and they said, go see Grace Davis. And they did, and of course I'd love to talk about that. They came to me and I told them, well, I have given the irregularities to UCLA and the Chicano Studies Library. So if you want to see them, you can make copies of them. They'll let you, you know, you can read them and everything. Well, that cinched the case for them. They won. And I always felt that that was a victory for Roybal.
Well,
Well, let me say this one finishing thing. Just recently, I don't remember the year, but this I brought to show you. I got the first Lucille Roybal Award last year or something like that. But that's this award, which I think is beautiful. The artist wrote things in there. I can't see them anymore, but you can read the different dedications and things like that. So if you want to come and see it.
okay. Maybe we can open it up for
Yes, I
question and
think so.
answers.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Grace, for those wonderful stories and memories, and Anna NietoGómez, thank you for leading that important conversation. I learned a lot, even though I spent many hours talking to Grace. There's always little details that are added each time the story is told. And just to let you know that this photograph back here is of that, campaign that Grace was talking about when Edward Roybal runs for supervisor.
In 1958.
In 1958 and 58, and loses because of voter fraud. So we're gonna open it up to questions. Does anybody have any questions for either Ms. NietoGómez or Mrs. Davis?
I do. Hi. Hi.
You wanna give us your name and then
Sure.
if you're from UCLA, just in
Hi, my name is Mayra Avitia. I am undergrad. I was an undergrad, stay here at UCLA. I am currently a PhD candidate at UC San Diego. And I'm actually writing my dissertation on Comisión, Feminist Mexicana Nacional. And so I drove here today just to meet you guys, but also I wanted to ask you, part of what you said was earlier was about seeking help and working with others. Can you talk about that within the women's movement? How did you find space for yourself and for other women?
Well, the women who were involved in all these women's, they actually, were focusing on women's issues, of course, which made it easy for me. I just saw them and knew what they were about, and I joined them. But yes, actually, I really don't remember that the women themselves, were really asking for help. I think all of us need to develop that in terms of seeking, not just for our own education or whatever opportunities, we may, whatever we're doing, but just for our families. We need to start early when we're in school, in grammar school, learning about resources and what things are there for. I mean, there's this office over here. What's it for? What do they do there? Because it may be something that can help you. Or you may learn about it and next day somebody else needs that help. And I guess, I've always been curious. To give you an example, my brother had a Underwood typewriter and I needed to know how it worked. So I took it apart. And, it never occurred to me I have trouble putting it out.
I did the same thing to a vacuum cleaner. I also had trouble putting it back together.
But no, I know that we're not all curious, but I think, we should start telling each other to be curious, to want to be nosy, find out what's going on around us, not just ourselves. I know when I lived in Lincoln Heights, this was the little world of, I had never been to Figueroa Street. And, a lot of things, and that's because I guess we used to live that way. Now, Lincoln Heights was predominantly Italian, and they dominated. They were the landlords, the grocery store owners, they owned all the businesses and so on. So we had a hard time. My mother used to have to stand in front of the house or the street there and watch me go to the corner store, because the Italians would take the milk away and break it and throw it. They would hit me or something like like that. So you know, they had many traditions with our Blessed Mother, and they used to have a procession and so on. For St. Joseph, they used to have altars in their homes that they would allow us to go through, and so on. But I remember the first time I was in college at Immaculate Heart, and my, my niece, I guess, yeah, I had been playing with the landlord's granddaughter, and the girl hit my niece, and all. And I came home from school, and my mother told me all about it. Well, I got up and went to her house, knocked on the door, and told her that her daughter had hit my granddaughter. That's the first time I stood up like that. And I blamed it on my education, the fact that I now knew that you do things like this, that you can speak up. And I'll tell you, I never felt so good as I did when I went home.
In the women's movement, as a up-and-comer, to me, Grace was in the right place, in the place of influence in politics, and politics was a place where you had access to power and access to influence bodies outside of our community. So she was kind of like always at the crossroads at the right time, and she was like the liaison between, like, for example, when President Kennedy in 1961 established the President's Commission on the Status of Women. Mm-hmm. Really, in California, I don't know about anywhere else, or in LA more specifically, that was kind of like what was going on in the larger society and the women's was more the hinterland. But Grace, because of her involvement in the Democratic Party, CSO, able to work with everybody, man, woman, and she was asked to participate in the California State Commission on the Status of Women, and she represented the Chicana Mexican American women in New York. She came back, she reported that, she was kind of our connection and trying to connect there. And she helped women get involved in politics, encouraged them to run for office. As far as the Chicana Service Action Center, that was the first employment women's center. She was, when she was working with the Department of Labor, first of all, there was a network of Chicanas, Mexican American women, statewide, nationwide. There was no internet, there was the telephone and the lovely letter. They communicate to each other through the letter more than the telephone. And Grace was working for the Department of Labor, and Francisca Flores attended the Department of Labor conference. I think it was in Arizona. Grace was there. Arizona
Yeah.
and Phoenix.
Yeah.
And Grace, Francisca had just started the Comisión Feminist in 1970. So they go to the Department of Labor, the Women's Department of Labor conference, and they say, why don't you have statistics on the Mexican American woman? She works, in the labor force. We can't even decide what their needs are because they're not. There's no information on them. And Etta Gary, who was the regional director, says, well, I've never gotten a proposal. And so Francisca pulls out of her purse and gives him a proposal. And Grace was there to help massage that proposal, provide the technical experience, and get it funded, and continue to solicit political and funding for that organization and for Comisión Femenil. And she was a strong supporter to get women involved in electoral politics.
That's similar to what happened to Donicio Morales when Johnson had the National Conference on Hispanics in Texas, in El Paso, I guess it was. And they had all the federal agencies in different hotels. And when he came to the Department of Labor, he did the same thing. He says, we've never had a proposal from any of you. So Donicio stood up and waved, and he got funded. Now, the reason I was involved in all this is because what they do, if the proposal comes in Washington, like it did that time, it then got sent to San Francisco for the regional office, and then to Los Angeles, where I was working. So my boss or director and I worked with Donicio to get that into shape and so on, and he got funded so many times and all that. And that MAOF just awarded this on October the 9th, and it's a Life Achievement Award, which I was very proud of. I have because I was the project officer for him, even when I was with the city until they decided it was a conflict of interest. You know, I was the project officer for the city and for Donicio and others that were in Los Angeles. So they decided I was a conflict. So, by the way, when I got to Bradley, when he hired me, there was what they called an interpersonal action bill or something. But anyway, it allowed for people from the feds, whatever department, to go to work for cities or counties, and they feds would pay half your salary, and the city or whoever would pay the other half. So that's how we funded my salary with Bradley, which was a big help, with so on.
Grace, why don't you share your experience? I like the story when you tell me about when you were acting mayor, like you were the first acting mayor, woman mayor in Los Angeles, so the media was all curious about it. What was that like?
I don't remember what happened to, I think it was when Maury Weiner, was, I forget whatever they were charging you with. He was not there, I was the only deputy. And so he and his wife were going to Europe. And so, he left me as mayor. Well, his wife, by the way, told him, you leave your car, you leave this and all this, the thing. And of course, he couldn't. But from the very beginning of the day, the media was there, following me around everywhere I went. If I answered the phone, they were there to listen and so on. And they said because they wanted to see how I did things. And I said, well, I would do them the same as Bradley. I mean, I know what his duties are, and I do them. If there's an issue that I need to take care of, I do it, to my best of my ability and of the way I think, the mayor would handle it. But all day, they were there. Just, to
You were
see
curiosity,
this woman.
political curiosity.
And
I
so-
wonder, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm wondering if there's any more questions before we close. Does anybody else have a final question or comment? I just have one thing that I'd like to mention, and that is, in history, I'm a historian, we look at generational change,
Yeah.
and a lot has been said about the difference between the Mexican American generation that Grace comes from and the Chicana generation that Ms. Gomez comes from. So Ms. NietoGómez, is there a difference, do you think, in your generations, the way that you approached your activism? Can you maybe speak on that? If you think there was some shift that occurred in the 60s that the historians talk about?
Yeah, I really do, because my generation, as you know, there were just a lot of obstacles, and there just weren't that many opportunities and so on. But when the Chicanas, to me it was different. Yeah, I remember going to visit different colleges or universities like Fullerton and Orange. I went to many of them. I went to Northridge and different places. They were different. Unfortunately, we were still struggling with the men. They were still wanted to keep our place. They didn't really, they really weren't objecting, but they were kind of not stepping in and helping us move. They were still among ourselves. The men were still, and again, some women were hesitating, but they were moving. They were beginning to move. And I really liked them. I really, they always challenged me to see whether I was a Mexican American. I had to be a Chicana, and so on. I think that the fact that there were a couple of women who were, getting into politics and stuff was, encouraging to the young people and so on. Because I think that's when Nell Soto ran for her husband's seat and so on. But, and then a little maybe after even my friends of my own daughters, they take for granted things that we really struggled and got. They don't realize that they're able to go to school and choose what they want because we struggled. And
I found there to be a generational split. As a Chicana, and the Chicana generation, because of the cultural nationalism movement, there was like a regressive movement. Even though here the Grace's generation had struggled to achieve education, but many, especially women in the CSO, many of those women had dropped out of high school because they had to help their parents support the families. And they returned to college about the time we were going to college. They didn't return, they got their, the GED, and they were going. But this was like so exciting for the women, let's call them from the 60s, who were in the 60s. And Chicanas, there was educational opportunity program, we were entering the colleges. The thing was recruiting, so there was this recruitment process. But through cultural nationalism, then all of a sudden there was this philosophy, well, what's the Chicana's role, and maybe she should retain that traditional role. So when I met Grace and the women of MAPA and the women of the CSO, and when I first went to the Comisión conference in Goleta, it was remarkable that, because I thought that women's rights, women's choice, women pursuing whatever it was that she wanted to pursue, I got a lot of resistance towards that. Other Chicanas got a lot of resistance to that, and we were in the Chicana period. I'm talking about the women, the young women, 18 to 30 years old. The women were resisting those women who were doing that. Forget them, in addition to the Mexican, the dudes. So when you go to Comisión Femenil conference, the most striking thing to me, because there was about 300, 400 women there, was that here were these women, older than me, the age of my aunts and my mothers, who just took this for granted, that of course we had to fight for women's rights. They all worked, either from the time they were teenagers up to the time that they were 30, 40, whatever age they were, and they experienced discrimination. They knew that of course that was something they had to do, that we had to do. They were so excited about the youth entering the colleges, and they supported them to explore what they wanted to do, and they didn't know why we didn't know why we were having a cultural identity question. So there was that split. So it was the older generation that, to me, helped me reinforce my thinking, because before that thinking only came from my family, my mom's family. And then when I saw the rest of my mom's generation sending me the same message, I knew I wasn't so crazy. This was the right path to go.
Anything else before we end it and enjoy the lovely reception?
to
You have
add
a comment?
Yes, your microphone.
One thing that I
Your
was,
microphone.
oh, sorry. One thing that, an opportunity that was given to me that I thought was interesting. I can think it was Carter. I got appointed to 2 federal commissions. The Social Security, and by the way, one of the members at that time was the woman who was on the original Social Security Commission that Roosevelt appointed. And she was there on that, and I got to meet her and a lot of people, and got to meet people because we went all over the country visiting, different communities and so on. The other one was the Immigration Commission. And there I remember it was a time of the Vietnamese people who came, the refugees who came. And again, it was a very timely, issue that was of interest and of necessity to our people and so on. So I consider that, to be of significance in my appointments. I must say that being the first, it was, I don't know if there were other deputies in this world of the United States, but the fact that I was the deputy of such a large city, I guess that gave significance to the appointment, because I have been contacted or have been able to go all over the United States. There are Latinos everywhere. And it's been really wonderful to be able to meet organizations and individuals. I didn't walk alone. When I went from being born to now, there have always been Latinos with me. I have wonderful friends, wonderful people who supported me and so on. I know the federal employees of the Immigration department in Los Angeles actually wrote my resume and submitted it. They wanted me to be the director of immigration. I didn't have time to do that. So they said, we'll do it, and they did.
Those are good
I
friends.
came in second. The man who got elected, Gustafsson, is still a good friend of mine. But the employees in the city and the county have always made me aware that they're there to help, to support me. I know that when Bradley announced that I was stepping down and he was appointing someone else, that newsroom, the whole front was of people. I know that there were people from here and all over who were there to object to the mayor, which he, by the way, has a political right to do what he wants. It really has been an amazing experience to have met people. I met the King and Queen of England. I've met others from Australia, from Japan. And just, it made me aware of, we're everywhere.
We're everywhere. Yeah, that's wonderful. I think that's a great place to end this. Thank you so much. We're everywhere and we're with you here today, and we look forward to the wonderful reception. Thank you, CSRC. Thank you, everybody, for organizing this wonderful event.